My parents had gone away for the weekend, leaving me alone for the first time. They trusted me, and I assured them I'd be fine. After all, it was just 2 nights. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, I settled in for the night. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and turned on the security system. Everything seemed secure, and the familiar hum of the house provided a false sense of comfort. I decided to watch a movie to pass the time. I curled up on the couch with a bowl of popcorn, the flickering screen casting eerie shadows around the living room. Halfway through the movie, a loud thud echoed through the house. I paused the film, my heart pounding. I listened intently, but all I heard was the rustling of the wind against the windows. It's just the house settling, I told myself, trying to calm my nerves. I resumed the movie, but my mind kept wandering back to the noise. After a few minutes, I heard it again, this time louder and closer. It was coming from the basement. My parents had always warned me about the basement. It was old, damp, and filled with cobwebs. I rarely went down there, but tonight, curiosity and a growing sense of dread compelled me to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, I made my way to the basement door. The door creaked open, revealing a dark staircase that seemed to descend into nothingness. Taking a deep breath, I stepped down, the wooden stairs groaning under my weight. The air grew colder and heavier with each step, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. As I reached the bottom, the smell of mildew filled my nostrils. I scanned the basement, but everything appeared normal. Old furniture, dusty boxes, and a workbench covered in tools. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a faint whisper. It was so soft I almost thought I imagined it. "Ellie." My blood ran cold. I whipped around, the flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing off the basement walls. There was no answer, only silence. Heart pounding, I climbed the stairs as fast as I could, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the fear gnawing at my gut told me otherwise. Back in the living room, I grabbed my phone to call my parents, but there was no signal. The storm outside must have knocked out the cell tower. I tried the landline, but it was dead too. I was completely cut off. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. I fumbled for the flashlight, my hands shaking. I felt utterly alone, the oppressive silence of the house pressing down on me. Then I heard it again, the whisper, closer this time. "Ellie." I spun around, shining the flashlight into the dark corners of the room. Nothing. I backed away, my mind racing. There had to be a rational explanation. A loud crash came from upstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared up at the ceiling, the footsteps growing louder and closer. I clutched the flashlight like a lifeline and crept toward the staircase. As I reached the bottom step, the footsteps stopped. I slowly climbed the stairs, each creak of the wood echoing in the stillness. When I reached the top, I saw the door to my bedroom ajar. It had been closed earlier. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, but the window was open, the curtains billowing in the cold night air. I shut the window, my mind reeling. I turned to leave when I noticed something on my bed. It was a photo, an old, faded picture of a little girl standing in front of the house. My house. Scribbled on the back in shaky handwriting were the words, "I'm still here." Terror gripped me as I backed out of the room. I had to get out of the house. I raced down the stairs and flung open the front door, only to be met by the pitch-black woods. With no other choice, I ran into the forest, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly in front of me. I ran until my legs burned and my breath came in ragged gasps. Finally, I stopped, leaning against a tree to catch my breath. The silence of the woods was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I listened intently, but there was nothing. Maybe I had escaped whatever had been in the house. Just as I began to calm down, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. The whisper came again, right in my ear. "Ellie, I screamed and ran deeper into the woods, the flashlight flickering and dying in my hand. I was plunged into darkness, my screams swallowed by the night. I stumbled and fell, my body giving out from exhaustion and fear. As I lay on the forest floor, I heard the whisper one last time, soft and haunting. "Welcome home." And then, there was only silence. I don't know how long I lay there on the forest floor, paralyzed by fear and exhaustion. My eyes fluttered closed and darkness enveloped me. The last thing I heard was the faint whisper of "Welcome home" echoing in my mind. When I woke up, rain was gently falling on my face. My parents were leaning over me, their faces etched with worry. I realized I was lying on the front porch of our house. "Ellie, are you okay?" Mom's voice trembled. "Mom?" I croaked, disoriented. Dad helped me sit up. "What happened, Ellie?" "I heard whispers in the house," I said, my voice shaking. "Footsteps, too. I ran into the woods and then... nothing." "We found you here," Dad said gently. "The power's out, and we were worried." "I saw a photo," I insisted. "A girl, and it said I'm still here." Dad checked the house, but everything was normal. No photo, no sign of anyone else. We locked up and settled in the living room, the fire warming us. That night I slept between my parents, their presence comforting me. I'd been planning this solo camping trip for weeks. It was my way of proving to myself I could handle it, a rite of passage before my senior year. The forest was dense and isolated, exactly what I wanted. I set up my tent in a small clearing, the canopy of trees blocking out most of the late afternoon sun. By the time I got a fire going, the shadows were long and the temperature was dropping. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds. The rustling of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the crackling of my campfire. I sat by the fire, eating a simple meal and enjoying the solitude. It was peaceful at first, but then I started to feel uneasy. It felt like someone was watching me. I shrugged it off as my imagination, but the feeling persisted. I decided to call it a night and crawled into my tent, zipping it up tightly. Lying in my sleeping bag, I listened to the sounds of the forest, trying to reassure myself. After a while, I began to drift off to sleep. A snap of a twig nearby jolted me awake. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen. There it was again, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling my campsite. I reached for my flashlight and shone it through the tent fabric, but saw nothing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response, just the continued crunch of leaves. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The fire had burned down to embers, casting eerie shadows. I saw nothing, but the footsteps stopped. I lay back down, every muscle tense, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. Minutes felt like hours. Just as I was starting to calm down, I heard it, a low, guttural whisper, almost unintelligible but unmistakable.
"Leave."
I bolted upright, shining the flashlight in every direction. "Who's there?" I demanded, but only the whispering wind answered. My mind raced. It had to be a prank, someone messing with me. But who? I was miles from the nearest house. The whisper came again, closer this time.
"Leave now."
Fear gripped me. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed my essentials into it, and decided to break camp. The fire was almost out, and the darkness pressed in around me. As I worked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, watching me. Just as I was about to finish packing, I heard a loud crash in the trees, followed by heavy, fast footsteps. Whatever it was big and it was coming towards me. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I grabbed my gear and ran, leaving my tent and the dying fire behind. The forest was a maze of shadows and sounds. Branches clawed at me as I stumbled through the underbrush, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The footsteps followed, relentless and fast. I could hear the ragged breath of whatever was chasing me. I tripped over a root and fell hard, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and rolling away. In the darkness, I could see a figure approaching, tall, indistinct and menacing. The whisper came again right next to my ear.
Too late.
I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the flashlight, and ran harder than I ever had in my life. Finally, I broke through the trees and onto a dirt road. I looked back, but the figure was gone. The footsteps had stopped. Gasping for breath, I kept running until I reached a small ranger station. I pounded on the door until a groggy park ranger opened it. I spilled out my story, breathless and terrified. He listened, a skeptical look on his face, but let me in. The next day, we went back to my campsite. Everything was as I'd left it, except for one thing. My tent was slashed to ribbons, and deep, claw-like marks were gouged into the ground around the campsite. The ranger paled at the sight and helped me gather my remaining things. I never camped alone again. I had always dreamed of escaping the city's chaos and finding peace in the tranquility of the woods. When I found the old house nestled deep in the forest, miles from the nearest neighbor, it seemed perfect. It was an old, rustic house, with a charm that felt like a warm embrace. My dog Max seemed to love it too, running around the yard with boundless energy. The first few days were idyllic. Max and I would explore the surrounding woods during the day and relax by the fireplace at night. The isolation was a welcome change and the silence was soothing. But then strange things began to happen. It started with the noises. At first I thought it was just the house settling. Old houses make sounds, I told myself. But these were different. At night, as I lay in bed, I would hear faint whispers, like someone was standing just outside my window, speaking in hushed tones. Max would growl softly, his ears perked up, eyes fixed on the darkness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I took Max out for a walk. We wandered deeper into the woods than usual, enjoying the crisp air. As we were heading back, Max suddenly stopped, his body tense, ears pricked. He growled low, a deep rumbling sound I had never heard from him before. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, trying to peer into the gathering darkness. Max's growling grew louder, and then I saw it, a figure, standing among the trees, barely visible in the fading light. It was tall and thin, its features indistinct. I felt a chill run down my spine. I called out, but there was no response. The figure just stood there, watching. I yanked Max's leash, pulling him back towards the house. As we hurried away, I glanced over my shoulder, but the figure was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. Max was restless too, pacing the room, whining softly. I finally drifted off to sleep, only to be awakened by a loud bang. I sat up, heart pounding, and saw that the front door was wide open. Max was barking furiously, his hackles raised. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the door. I shone the beam into the darkness outside, but there was nothing, no sign of anyone. I locked the door and checked all the windows, making sure everything was secure. The next day I found strange markings on the trees surrounding the house. They looked like symbols, crudely carved into the bark. I had never seen them before, and they filled me with a sense of unease. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to local kids playing pranks. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Max was on edge, barking at the windows. I tried to calm him, but he wouldn't settle down. I decided to keep a light on and stay awake, hoping to catch whoever was trying to scare me. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate. I held my breath, flashlight in hand, and waited. The doorknob turned slowly, but the door was locked. Max was growling again, his teeth bared. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no answer, just the sound of footsteps retreating. I waited a few minutes before daring to open the door. The porch was empty, but I noticed something on the ground, a small, crude doll made of sticks and twine, with a symbol carved into its chest. Fear settled in the pit of my stomach. I decided it was time to call the authorities. The nearest police station was an hour away, but they promised to send someone to check on us. The officer arrived the next morning, a burly man with a reassuring presence. He listened to my story, examined the doll and the markings, and did a thorough search of the property. He found nothing unusual but advised me to stay alert. "Probably just local kids messing around," he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Max was unusually quiet, staying close to my side. As I lay in bed, I heard the whispers again, clearer this time. They seemed to be coming from inside the house. I grabbed the flashlight and followed the sound, Max at my heels. The whispers led me to the basement door. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. Slowly, I opened the door and descended the creaky stairs. The basement was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the stone walls. I shone the flashlight around, my heart racing. In the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood there, its back to me, tall and thin, just like the one in the woods. It turned slowly, revealing a gaunt, hollow-eyed face. The whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. Max barked furiously, lunging at the figure. The figure let out a piercing scream, a sound so inhuman and filled with agony that it made my blood run cold. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. "Max, run!" I shouted, grabbing his collar. We bolted up the stairs, the scream echoing in our ears. I slammed the basement door shut and pushed a heavy cabinet in front of it. My hands were shaking. Max and I huddled in the living room, every sound amplified in the silence. The scream had stopped, but the fear lingered, a palpable presence in the air. As dawn broke, I packed my things, loaded Max into the car, and left the house behind. As we drove away, I glanced back at the house one last time. It stood there, silent and foreboding, a dark shape among the trees. I never returned to that house in the woods. Some places are meant to be left alone, their secrets buried deep. I found a new place in the city, far from the isolation of the forest. Max and I are safe now, but sometimes late at night I think I can still hear the whispers.